And so it's gotten kind of deep for women. This was something that we tried to prepare people for, the His Name is My Name Too campaign. And we tried to let them know that it was going to bring up some, some pretty ugly situations. It's going to bring up some hurt feelings. Going to make people have to deal with some things that they were not necessarily ready to deal with. But that does not mean it's not time for it to occur. I mean, it's as hard as things are. We are losing thousands and thousands of children because they're out there raising themselves. They're out there being raised by television, and television is telling them all of these demonic things to do. And, because their mothers and fathers are not there to say, no, we're not going to watch that. No, you're not going to look at that. No, that's not the way it is. This is the way it is. Without that educator there to teach them that the stuff that is on television is the dysfunction and not the natural thing, these children go out and try to repeat these dysfunctional things that they see. And, without that mother there for 8, 10, and 12 hours, these children are just being completely taken over by demonic television, demonic music, and demonic education that tells them that they should be happy to be shambles and pickaninnies. They should be happy to be inferior. They should be happy to get out there and act an idiot. They should be happy to be dominated by whites. There's nothing wrong with it, with, being a slave. Slavery wasn't that bad. It's telling them all these things, and without somebody there to counter that, these children aren't believing it. So when I tell women that are blacks, period, I have to take them back to different codes that are in the laws hidden down in basements of white institutions where whites have put some of these skeletons of their own, that things they did against black people, things they did for white people against the black population. And so when we dig up these bones, it's very hard for white people, but it becomes this shocking eye-opener for black people. And so we're going to dig up a bone from Georgia. I'm going to dig up a bone from 1865 and share with you a bone that we shared with black men and black women in the discussion. This is an actual act. This is a law or ordinance. You had whites actually sit down in city councils and assembly, representatives. And this is the kind of thing that had to go through the House of Representatives for the state and the Senate for the state. And they both had to agree on this, and they both had to vote on it. It had to pass, and then it had to go to the governor for his signature, and he had to agree with it and sign it. When you hear some of these bones that we dig up, many of these bones had to go through the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. It had to go through the Senate in Washington, D.C. Both places had to vote on it, agree on it, and pass it to the President of the United States. And the President of the United States had to agree with it and go along with it and sign off on it in order for it to be done. So the bone we're dealing with today says, whereas during the late war of the state of Georgia has been overrun by the opposing armies, the accumulated capital of nearly a century represented by slave labor, amounting to nearly $300 million, has been destroyed, and the prospect of successful agriculture, the basis of all value, now dependent on the voluntary labor of freedmen, is in question of doubt and experimentation. Therefore, there should be no levy or sale of property of defendants in the state under any execution founded on any judgment, order, or decree of any court theretofore or hereafter, to be rendered upon any contract or liability made or incurred prior to the 1st June the 1st of 1865. Okay? So now, when you think of 1865, you got 1863, where the so-called emancipation occurred, which freed slaves in the southern Confederate states that were opposing the United States. It didn't free all slaves. It just freed slaves in the Confederate states. Indentured servants were not included in that Emancipation Proclamation. And, of course, if you were in the prison industrial complex or being moved over to the prison industrial complex, you were still a slave. So understanding, first of all, that the Emancipation Proclamation did not and was not intended to end slavery. It was simply meant to punish Confederate states that were going up against the United States, the newly formed United States. So over a 2-year period, without the slave labor that they depended upon, the southern Confederate states that were going up against the United States were financially devastated. So now once it was over, of course, the United States now has to fix everything in order for there to be a union. And so what they did was, one, they took on the $75 million debt that the Confederate states had borrowed, the money that they had borrowed from other countries in order to fight Britain, fight their parents and grandparents. So the Confederate states took money from France, from different places in Europe, took money from different Asian countries and whatnot. They borrowed this money in order to fight their parents and grandparents on this before slavery. And the countries that were still slave countries, full force, were willing to loan the Confederates the money to keep slavery going and fight to keep slavery going here on this continent. And so this Confederate states actually racked up $75 million in foreign debt. And in school, children used to actually learn about the things that occurred during the Civil War. Now they try to gloss it over so that it seems like it was all just a wonderful thing, and thank God there was a Civil War and slaves were free. Well, that's not exactly the truth. That's not exactly the case. But in 1865, the states that lost against their parents and grandparents in the newly formed United States said that during the war, we have been overrun by our parents and grandparents and the armies of the newly formed United States. We've lost, basically. And the accumulated capital, the money that we've made from centuries of, from the century of slave labor has been, decimated, has been taken. And so without this slave labor, we now have to depend agriculturally on these new free black people to voluntarily work to pick our cotton and pick our tobacco and plant our crops and harvest our crops, which we believe is not possible. That without the institution of slavery, they won't want to do it, or they'll charge us, for doing it. We won't have that slave labor anymore, which means it's going to cost us an arm and a leg.